Hey everyone, welcome back. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me for today's explainer because, well, we're looking at one of the most phenomenal bottleneck moments in modern music history. We are going to explore how a single, raw, sweat-soaked British blues band operating in the 1960s managed to lay the entire evolutionary groundwork for modern hard rock. It's just this incredible story of innovation, clashing egos, and pure musical genius.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to start with the British blues boom, look at Eric Clapton, the purist, Jeff Beck, the innovator, Jimmy Page, the architect, the birth of Led Zeppelin, and finally, a lasting rock legacy. Think of it like a historical relay race.
So, Section 1, the British blues boom. Let's anchor ourselves right in the raw, smoky blues clubs of 1963 London, where the Yardbirds famously took over the Rolling Stones residency at the Quartet Club. Now, look at this incredibly rapid 5-year period. I mean, between their formation in '63 and their dissolution in '68, the band went through this blistering cycle of member changes. But more importantly, they practically single-handedly shifted popular music from traditional rhythm and blues all the way to the edges of progressive rock. That speed of evolution, it's almost unheard of.
You know, the guitarists usually get all the glory in rock history, right? But it was actually this core rhythm section, Keith Relf, Jim McCarty, Paul Samwell Smith, and Chris Dreja, who truly drove those explosive live shows. Relf brought this haunting, distinctive vocal style and absolutely blistering harmonica work. They provided the unshakable foundation that allowed their rotating cast of guitar geniuses to shine so brightly.
Which brings us to Section 2, Eric Clapton, the purist. Let's look at the arrival of an 18-year-old kid who brought a level of dedication to traditional blues that was frankly almost religious in its intensity. To really understand Clapton's mindset at the time, we have to hear this anecdote from his bandmate, Chris Dreja. He recalled Clapton literally practicing 2 notes for a whole day. No way, right? But this wasn't about being flashy. This was about absolute rigid discipline. Clapton was a devoted student of American legends like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf. He wanted the Yardbirds to be an authentic, pure blues band, playing with total traditional respect. So the crucial turning point is what happened when the band actually achieved mainstream success. In March 1965, the Yardbirds released For Your Love. And it was a massive commercial pop hit, leaning way away from the blues. Because Clapton was such a strict purist, he just couldn't stand the commercial evolution. Actually, scratch that. He didn't just stand it. He walked away from the band right as they were hitting it big. But before he left, he did them a massive favor. He recommended his friend, a wildly successful session musician named Jimmy Page, as his replacement. Section 3. Jeff Beck, the innovator. After Jimmy Page initially declined the job, Jeff Beck stepped into the spotlight and completely shattered that traditional blues mold. And this brilliantly illustrates the jarring shift in the band's dynamic. On one hand, we have Clapton's rigid devotion to traditional blues discipline, and on the other, Beck's wild, unpredictable, chaotic sonic experimentation. Beck wasn't interested in being a purist at all. He wanted to push the electric guitar into entirely new, unexplored territories. He brought feedback, distortion, and unending sustain right to the forefront of popular music. Beck achieved this futuristic sound by embracing brand new technology, specifically early fuzz boxes like the Tonebender Mark I. By utilizing this fuzz box, Beck pushed tracks like their '66 hit Shapes of Things completely out of standard blues rock and into heavy, uncharted, psychedelic territory. Seriously, it was music that sounded like it was beamed in from another planet. Under Beck's chaotic genius, they weren't just a standard blues rock outfit anymore. The Yardbirds transformed into a fiercely experimental group willing to explore global influences. They started incorporating incredibly diverse sounds, like mimicking the drone of a sitar on tracks like Heart Full of Soul, bringing in elements of Indian music, even experimenting with the solemnity of Gregorian chants. I mean, who does that in a blues band? And they filtered it all through advanced, forward-thinking pop sensibilities. They were so far ahead of their time, it's just astonishing. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 4, Jimmy Page, the architect. Because by 1966, Page was finally ready to step out of the recording studio and officially join the group. For a brief, legendary period in 1966, audiences were treated to a twin guitar attack featuring both Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page.
I mean, just imagine being in the crowd for that. Two of the greatest guitarists in history on the exact same stage at the same time. This dual guitar onslaught produced incredibly complex, forward-thinking tracks like Happenings 10 years time ago. It was explosive for sure, but with two massive creative forces bumping heads, it was also pretty short-lived. After Beck departed the band late in 1966, Page took sole control of the lead guitar duties. He began introducing highly innovative, almost theatrical techniques, like playing his electric guitar with a literal violin bow. But more importantly, Page was actively pushing the band towards a much heavier, darker, and more aggressive sound. Actually, without even knowing it, he was laying out the heavy rock blueprint that would completely dominate the 1970s. Which brings us to Section 5, the birth of Led Zeppelin. By 1968, exhaustion and internal tensions finally dissolved the Yardbirds, leaving Jimmy Page standing at a massive historical crossroads.
To fulfill some lingering tour obligations, Page had to act incredibly fast. Step 1, he formed a temporary lineup called the New Yardbirds. Step 2, he recruited a dynamic young vocalist named Robert Plant, who brought along this thunderous drummer John Bonham. Step 3, he added seasoned session musician John Paul Jones on bass and keys, and once they played together, the chemistry was just undeniable. So, Step 4, they dropped the old name and rebranded to Led Zeppelin. Page's hurried attempt to finish a tour accidentally forged the greatest rock band of the next decade. Crazy, right?
The musical DNA transfer between the two bands was absolute. It really represents a direct blues continuum. See, the Yardbirds were famous for taking traditional blues standards like Smokestack Lightning and infusing them with a modern experimental edge. Page took this exact approach and just magnified it. If you listen to Led Zeppelin's 1969 debut album, on tracks like You Shook Me, you hear a direct continuation of that Yardbirds philosophy. It's just heavier, way more dynamic, and played with an unprecedented sonic weight. Let's zoom out now for Section 6, a lasting rock legacy. The Yardbirds hold a totally unique place in history because they're remembered just as much for the monumental talent they incubated as the music they made. And you know, their influence is still actively celebrated today. Acclaimed modern guitarists like Johnny A have actually stepped in to tour alongside founding member Jim McCarty. Armed with prototype tonebender fuzzboxes provided by the original creators, musicians like Johnny A work fiercely to protect, promote, and preserve the band's iconic, fuzz-fueled legacy for entirely new generations of Focus listeners just like yourselves.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. If one single band, in the extraordinarily short span of just 5 years, could serve as the launchpad for Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page, what does that say about the raw, explosive, and truly unpredictable power of musical collaboration? It was a magical era where pushing boundaries was the norm, and it absolutely forever changed the way we listen to music today. Thank you so much for learning with me in this explainer, and keep that curiosity alive.